Waco survivor David Thibodeau, welcome to the show. It's an honor and a privilege to have you on, sir. How are you doing?
I'm very good. Thanks for having me here today. Appreciate it, man.
I have so many questions for you. So, where I really want to start today is because you're a musician. So, as a musician, you're a drummer, and that's always been your passion, from reading your book, is music and playing the drums. So, with that in mind, do you think that life imitates art or art imitates life?
Huh. I think there's some things that happen in life that defy a writer's room. There's some pretty amazing writing out there. There's some incredible shows, and you never know what's going to happen next year. I always think a character gets in a situation that he can't possibly get out of, and then a creative writer, gets him out of it, and you're like, "Wow, I never would have thought of that." That kind of thing.
Mm.
It's great writing, but there's sometimes in life where the reality is just so far beyond anything that you think you could have constructed in your own mind, and that absolutely was Waco. And see, there's this dimension that's missing in Waco. It's purposely missing on my part, and I know there's not many other people that can really tackle the subject. That's the scripture.
Right.
Nobody gets that. David was teaching something out of the Bible that made sense to a lot of people. Some people that have been studying scripture their entire lives, and he comes, across and he's teaching these seven seals. I know people talk about it a lot, but listen, it's hard to overestimate the importance of the scripture when it comes to what happened at Waco. Most people keep it political. Even people that I find to be kind of libertarian bent or really understand the Constitution and really realize the violations that have taken place at Waco. Don't want to look at the scriptural aspects, and I think they walk away. Even especially very intelligent people, they walk away thinking, well, maybe the people there they're just a little bit duped. Just they just had the wool pulled over their eyes that Koresh was a con man, as the FBI said over and over again. David was a con man. Well, David was a lot of things, and he made some terrible decisions that led to a lot of problems for a lot of people. He put a lot of people in danger. He's historically coming off as not one of the better people that have ever existed, and I understand that, but there was still a depth there that people just don't at all want to focus on or think about or talk about even. There's like a very, very few. And I bring this up because the ferocity of what the government did, I believe, was spiritually motivated.
I believe so too, and we're gonna get into that. What do you think was the biggest lie? And I know that there was a lot of them that was told about Mount Carmel during the siege of March of 1993 by the media or by the ATF or the FBI.
But I thought you were going in a different way there. So first, let me answer the question I thought you were going to ask.
Uh,
And what do I think that was the biggest lie that they told and why? And then I'll tell you. I'll answer your question. But to me, the helicopter shooting at the building is something that they have all denied. All of the agents on the ground and the agents in the helicopters. Um, for years, they said that the helicopters did not fire into the building. And then at trial, we had one of the defense attorneys was like, "Are you saying that none of the helicopters fired in at the building?" And the guy in the stand said, one of the ATF guys, one of the head guys said, "Yeah, there were no mounted guns on those helicopters." Well, that wasn't the question. The question was the helicopters or people that were on the helicopters shoot into the building. And then he simply asked, did the agents that were on the helicopters, were they armed? And he had to answer yes. So the agents on those helicopters were armed. Many eyewitnesses on the ground saw the helicopters firing, or saw shots from the helicopters headed toward the building. People on the inside, including myself, including Dick DeGuerin and Jack Zimmerman, the two attorneys that came in during the siege, that the helicopters, the evidence of bullet holes in the roof coming from the outside in. Anyway, this is important because constitutionally, we're not supposed to use military equipment against American citizens. Now, under the Posse Comitatus Act, because of the war on drugs back in the 80s, they had a caveat that basically stated if you could use military equipment against American citizens as long as you could prove there was a drug nexus or a drug connection. And so the ATF very blatantly lied about there being methamphetamines being produced at Mount Carmel under David Chris. There were absolutely no drugs there. He was never even accused of that. He actually turned in evidence of a meth lab back in '85 when he went out there and they had the gun battle with him and George Road, and that was a whole thing. And so they knew very well that there was not even any suspicion of a drug nexus out of Mount Carmel, but they lied and put that in so they could get the helicopter. So that alone, the whole premise for the raid is based on an immaculate lie. And I think if ever put under scrutiny, in other words, if we're ever on the line where people that were responsible for this raid had a congressional hearing or were in danger of going to jail for their actions, then I think the American public would find out some very frightening things about what happened behind the scenes and how they even got a warrant to go and get David Chris. And they think they would see that it was very unlawful.
I agree, but then unfortunately, after Waco, they turned all of their attention to outside terrorism. It wasn't domestic terrorism anymore. They started looking at foreign terrorism, and then 9/11 happened, and then it just kind of brushed, I think, everything under the rug from what happened with Waco, from what I'm really putting together. So there
Oh
were,
yeah, but also in '95 though you had Timothy McVeigh, which at first they said it was foreign terrorism, but then they finally had to admit this is a white boy from Wisconsin was he from? The point is that it was domestic terrorism. So after '95, 2 years after Waco, there was no denying that resources needed to be allotted to enemies domestic as well as foreign. A tank is a pretty amazing self-fulfilling prophecy. I just want to throw that out there. He said about 3 months, 4 months before all this happened, I was on the roof with him. We were building, putting the roof on the big place. He said, Tibbs, what are you going to do when there's tanks running up and down the Double E Ranch Road? And I said, David, they're never going to bring tanks. Or what are you, crazy? Sure enough, they brought tanks. They're running up and down the Double E Ranch Road. So, there was to answer, you had an earlier question too. I'm sitting there during the siege and I'm reading scripture and the Psalms. It's talking about the whole world being against the Lord's anointed one, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast their cords away from us. And David would say they didn't want the seals, right? So it's like you got all these armies. It's like there's an army set forth against us. And we're reading articles, we're hearing stuff on TV about them bringing in Russians were coming in for the psychops program. Literally, representatives from all over the world and some of these tactical armies were coming in to help the FBI, with training and tactics and things. And it's just, you're reading this and that scripture now becomes literal, right? The world has set themselves against this person. Everybody hated. If you remember, you're too young, but if you look at some of the, every day they had a press conference. Some of the press conferences, so much vitriol against the group. We were the most demonized group in history at the time on a global scale. I mean, when we came out of that place, we were worried about being hit, having tomatoes thrown at us, literally everything, because they did such a thorough job of demonizing the group. So it was much easier, I think, when the people died and the place burnt, for people to accept it as just a bunch of religious fanatics that got what they deserve. And that's what the government was counting on, that the people would believe that.